recommendations before us, and this is with Denise and Jacques again. Members, the same workshops I mentioned earlier helped inform our knowledge in this area.
Yep.
And I will move the A and the B. I will put that on the table. Seconded by the Deputy Chair. Thank you. Councillor Denise Lee. Members, and the strategic framework probably should be capital S and capital F, and that is on paragraph 34. But I'll let Jacques and Denise take us through this report.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take it, the report is read. I'll just make a few points as we go along. Probably really important to remember that early in the year, the committee agreed that this would be a streamlined, focused spatial plan, and we need to remember that this is a spatial plan after all. It is, therefore, by consequence, it is quite a high-level plan that sets the principles and the outcomes that we want to achieve, and therefore it will not include everything that the council does. It will focus on some of the key issues that Auckland faces over the next 30 years, and I suppose that is another important point to remember, that it is a 30-year plan. Also, that the Auckland plan is not an Auckland Council plan. It is about Auckland. It is not so much about what the Auckland Council can or will do, it is what Auckland needs. And then everybody kicks in the implementation of that plan, and that's the role that the Council then plays. So the strategic framework that we've put in front of you today is a result of the engagement that we've done over the year, starting in around February, and that was a targeted engagement. It wasn't all-encompassing consultation with the people of Auckland. So the framework is the result of that engagement so far, and we've engaged with stakeholders across the board. And what we're asking today really is just in principle, because we need a few markers as we go along. And so the in principle is for two reasons. First, that we can then take that framework and engage with those stakeholders on the next round and bring that feedback back to the committee again, and secondly also so that we can start drafting the plan, and you will see iterations of that draft coming to this committee and coming to committee workshops. So it is just that iterative development of the plan, so that we, come November, December, we have a draft plan that we can then go out to the formal consultation with all Aucklanders, and that will happen in February, March next year, where everybody then gets another chance to see the actual detail of the plan and what is exactly in there and not in there. So it is just a bit of a marker so that we can carry on doing some of the work. I am just going to highlight some of the main changes to the framework that came out of the last two workshops that we had with this committee 2 or 3 weeks ago. You'll see most of the changes are in the outcome around the environment and cultural heritage. Took the feedback on board. There were some concerns about the two be combined. At the second workshop, we came back to the people at the workshop and explained again why that combination, why are we taking this approach. And generally the feeling at the workshop was that that made a lot of sense and that we should proceed on that basis. However, there was the feeling that the environment needs to come out much stronger than it did in the original framework, and so you'll see quite a few changes to that outcome. So that was taken on board. There are some changes in the transport chapter, especially around the safety. So that feedback was taken on board, and we've made those changes. And there's also in homes and places, you will see quite a few changes, and that was really just sharpening the language to get kind of more to the point. So in attachment B, which is on page 59, we've actually included a track change version so that you can see all those changes that were made. So that's essentially the framework. I am going to just have a quick talk about 3 particular issues that came out during the workshops and that we did not deal to specifically in the workshops. And so we've done some work around that. and thinking how we can accommodate those requests. So the first is around Pacifica. How do Pacifica get reflected in the plan? The way that we can do that is, so there was a bit of an explanation at the workshop of the history, the past history and the role of Pacifica in Auckland, Auckland being a large Pacific city. How do we bring that flavour throughout in the plan? The solution that we can see to that is the bits that we are not showing you today. One of the bits that would be in addition to the framework, there's a whole front end to the plan that sets the broader context within which all of the outcomes would operate. That front context would, for example, deal with the treaty and co-governance. It would deal with Auckland's role in New Zealand and Auckland's role in the world, and we see that as an ideal place to actually bring in that same context around Pacifica, the role of Pacifica and the role and the history of Pacifica in Auckland. And so we can create that context at the front end of the plan, and then throughout the outcomes, one of the themes that you will see that in all of the outcomes is a focus of those most in need. And depending on what the issue is, those most in need would change and would be different. And that's how it then plays out in a practical sense. You've created the context up front around Pacifica and the role that they play in Auckland, and then through implementation, you focus on those most in need, which in many cases, depending on what the topic is, might be Pacifica. So that we think might be an eloquent way to deal with that issue.
Thank you, Jacques. Questions at the stage? I've got Councillor Fletcher, then Councillor Casey. So we're taking questions first, and then Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jacques, and thank you also for bringing into the discussion today the issue of Pacifica, which has been of concern to me. But my specific question to you is, a criticism I had of the last planning process by the Auckland Council leading up to the Auckland Plan was the reliance on workshops at the expense of open public debate. And I'd really just like you to comment on that. And it relates to the previous item as well, because whilst the chairs and the deputy chairs of the local boards may have a view, it isn't really until it goes to the whole local board that we get in an open meeting, we get clarity around what specifics they would like. And I think the same is true of councillors sitting around the table. I support the streamlined approach that you're taking, and I'm not wanting to be in any way critical of that. But I do think it could be a fault going forward if there is too much dependence on workshops. There does need to be more debating time in open committee sessions. So could you comment on that, please?
Sure. I suppose there are a few aspects of that. In terms of the local boards, so we've had a number of cluster workshops with all of the local board members. In addition to that, we have attended local board meetings where we individually go to all 21. So in that sense, I suppose there has been quite a bit of engagement with the local boards. Plus, of course, the chairs are all involved in the committee workshops, and that will continue over the next while. I suppose in terms of workshops, it is a bit more informal, and there is quite a bit of debate, I think. But yeah, you're right. That does not necessarily include the public. In terms of the engagement that we've done, that certainly has included the general public in the sense that we approached a whole number of community organizations, those organizations that kind of work regionally and represent a whole number of groups of communities. And so we've engaged them, and we've certainly had them engaged in the process. So in that sense, I suppose there is a bit of a debate with the broader community. But yes, you're right. It has not included a general public debate, and that's kind of what we see happening in February, March next year. Rather than, in the development of the plan, a draft plan, for us to be able to have that discussion. But it certainly has covered all aspects of the community in the targeted engagement.
Mr. Chairman, I just put on the table that I think it can actually be at the expense of the really complete outcome that you'd like to see, that dependence on workshops, and I think we should have more of a discussion on what the role of workshops might be going forward. It doesn't speed things up necessarily, because you end up having the debate twice on some issues. So I want to just bring that to your attention and ask that you give it consideration and that we might be able to discuss it at a subsequent meeting.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Councillor Casey, question.
No questions.
No question. Councillor Walker, question.
Sure, I've got just two related questions, Mr. Chair. Just two. And the context is Appendix A in the report that details the stakeholder engagement. And my question is, how is it that there has been no engagement with any groups that are environmental groups across the region? I don't see any. I note that there are a number, and I could list a number, Forest and Bird, for example, also groups across low carbon, such as Generation Zero. So my first question is, how is that?
Sorry, that was just a whisper in my ear that we did engage with Forest and Bird. So
Okay.
if they're not on the list, that is an apology. We somehow missed them.
Were there any other groups?
Councillor, sorry, apologies. So we have reached out to the Environmental Defence Society as well to provide some comment, and also groups like the Sustainability Society. So we have attempted to engage, I guess, given the level of where the plan was when we were reaching out. There may be more feedback coming as we've got the...
And my second question around context is, does that, I would suggest relatively poor engagement, take account of the disastrous state of our environment, as noted in our State of the Environment report, sea change, the state of the Hauraki Gulf and our other harbours, that's the blue aspect, but also the green aspect, the dramatic loss in tree cover, and I could go on. So are we taking into account sufficiently that context?
I suppose, Councillor Walker, we would like to think that we are engaging with key players in that sector and getting their feedback, and then once we have the draft plan come February, March, there will be the much wider engagement with people in that area.
And just
Thank you.
just to add to that, there have been some stakeholders who have indicated that they wanted to be engaged at a later stage in the process, and so we will be going back to them as we continue the engagement.
Thank you, Denise. Look, members, I'm also aware that there could be other names on that key stakeholder list if they had accepted the invitation to participate. There are a few that I learned of yesterday, and I went back to Jacques, and I was assured that the invitations went out. They just weren't responded to. But that doesn't mean to say we will not be chasing those parties to give them another opportunity. We'll be relentless in making sure that we continue to engage. Emails are easily missed, and we'll make sure that we connect with all the key stakeholder groups plus.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I note that there wasn't even a category for environment in the stakeholder list, so I just make that observation, not even a category. Thank you.
And you've heard the response that we did contact Forest and Bird and the Environmental Defence Society, and the latter has been very active in their engagement with staff, my understanding is. So I have another question from Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the officers, attachment B, we've got on page 59 of the agenda that I've got in front of me. We've struck out through track change. We've removed under for homes and places for people. We've struck out and marae development needs at attachment B. But then on page 61 under Māori identity and wellbeing, I'm assuming the third bullet point down invest and support marae to be self-sustaining and prosperous hubs for Māori and the wider community. My question would be, if we are striking out the words in relation to marae, are we covering, is it our interpretation that we're covering off papakainga housing under the bullet point for, in Māori identity and wellbeing?
Yes.
I don't want to be wordsmithing this as right now, but is there value in just reiterating that? Because I think that's very important. And when I reflect back on the feedback that we have got from a couple of the local boards in the previous item, particularly the Otara Papatoe and the Mangere Otahu local boards, I could imagine that the way in which they reflect their feedback, they would want that to be covered off, and I think that papakainga housing would be very important to address and to specifically codify at that point.
Thank you,
I
Councillor.
think that's been picked up.
Yes.
Thank you for that contribution. Councillor Cooper.
I mean, there's a lot of concern about people not being consulted, but there's a whole consultation period after January, isn't there? Where we actually put this out to the public. Yeah, and I just
28th of November, where we're confirming it in this committee.
Exactly.
And then
So
in the
there's
new
still
year, it goes for
a
public
lot of
notification.
time for that.
That's the
Okay.
formal. Of course, the committee and members have always stressed the need for informal and early as possible engagement, particularly with our whole of council family, which is, of course, the CCOs and local boards. And that's the stage that we're in now,
Cute.
as well as key stakeholders. And I can assure you, members, that key stakeholder list is growing by the week.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank our staff, because as soon as the environmental concerns were raised a couple of weeks ago, they got onto it. I just don't like the public to have the impression that no one was taking any notice, because it was latched onto and sorted out very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker, thank you. Alec, I have a question of you. At the last workshop, you represented, we didn't ask for you to represent on the issue of the interdependencies and interrelationship between environment and cultural heritage, but you did. And you gave a very clear and succinct presentation orally. And I'm just wondering if you are in a position now, for the benefit of members who could not be at that workshop, I think we had about half the members at that workshop, I'm wondering if you could repeat as best you can without your note prompts, which I don't think you have with you, and just explain the interdependency from your point of view of environment and cultural heritage.
Sure. I guess when we met last at the workshop, what I tried to capture was some of the theory behind how we landed on environment and culture heritage together. And there were broadly three things that I think I flagged. One is the general principles behind why we're doing this. And that stemmed a little bit from an actual recognition, and whilst it may not have come through in initial drafts, that actually the environment is foundational, and that it is actually a key part of the framing of the Auckland Plan, the refreshed Auckland Plan as a whole. So you'll recall, if you cast your minds back, that there were three key challenges that Auckland faced, and one of those was the impact of our growth, our development on the environment. And so actually, as we've worked through the plan, that's been central, not just with the protect and enhance as it was, or the environment and cultural heritage as it is now workstream, but also within the transport or the access and connectivity with the homes and places, and with some of the other work streams. So that actually has been a theme that we've looked to address all the way through. In terms of principles, then we also looked, if you recall, at both a Māori and a non-Māori view. And so some of the feedback that we'd heard just immediately prior to the workshop through the Māori wellbeing workstream was that actually the environment and people are inseparable. And that was a strong theme that came through and actually reflected in both that workstream, but also the protect and enhance, or the environment and cultural heritage side of things. I also, though, reflected that that's not just a Māori perspective, and we had a number of examples brought through the workshops that actually, from a non-Māori perspective, the environment of Auckland is actually critical to that component of heritage as well. We had examples of yourself, Councillor Darby, thinking about the Monia and how important that is to you. We had local board members as well reiterating that point. And also, if we think about how Auckland's developed and developing going forward, the fact that the environment has shaped a lot of that heritage, a lot of that culture, means that the two are really inseparable in terms of how we consider them. I also flag, I guess, the international context and some moves that we're seeing from some of the global heritage conservation organisations, that actually bringing the two together is actually a valuable way of moving forward. The second point that I'll just touch upon is the approach that we're taking within this work stream, and the fact that what we're trying to do is shift the focus from just saying we need to protect these heritage items in this natural environment to the question of why. And that's really important that we make that move, because as we've kind of alluded to in the preamble, that what we've done, the approach that we've taken, hasn't delivered the results that we want to see. And to Councillor Walker's points, you know, we continue to see that degrading environment. So what this work stream is trying to do is really focus on why we're looking to protect these environments, why we're trying to protect our cultural heritage, and the fact that the approach is agnostic of whether it's culture, heritage, or environment, and it's this consistent theme going forward. So that was, I guess, what we were trying to put across in terms of the link. The third point I'll raise is the diagram that hopefully the councillors, and if you haven't seen, you'll have seen in the papers, of the environment, social and the economic well-being, for want of a better term, in a kind of almost a Venn diagram. And we've seen historically there three interconnected circles, with the centre point being sustainable development. What we actually recognise now is that it's more of a concentric set, that the environment is the whole. Without the environment we have no society, no culture, and without that we have no economy. So that has actually framed, again, the Auckland Plan, and that's where we see the connectivity between not only environment and heritage, but also between all of the work streams.
Thank you, Alec. Appreciate that. Members, I have indication of an amendment from Councillor Casey, so I'll go back to you, Jacques.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, there were two more issues that came through the workshop that I just wanted to speak to quickly. So the one is around health and the other one was around rural.
Okay, sorry, I'll let you complete.
Right. So one of the other issues raised at the workshop was around how health fits into the outcomes that we have in that framework. So I'm just going to try and touch on that quickly. We've done, just to note, we've done quite a bit of work with the health sector in the engagement up till now, both primary health, but also around mental health. And so if you look at something like Healthy Auckland Together, which is a coalition of all the different players in the health sector coming together and having a bit of a strategic plan in terms of addressing health in Auckland. They essentially have 6 goals in their strategic plan. The first of those goals are around streets, parks and places. And that really is around physical activity as a way to deal with certain aspects of health. And if you think about that outcome, and if you think about the homes and places outcome, or that goal, and you think about the homes and places outcome in the Auckland Plan, that is absolutely what that is about. And that's what places are about. The same thing around the access and connectivity. It talks about making walking and cycling a preferred option and the things that we need to do around that to get people active. So absolutely lines up with that. Their second goal is around the food environment, and they're really trying to make healthy food available for everyone, everywhere. That really is a very sector-specific thing and not something that a spatial plan can really deal with to that extent. The third one is around collaboration and leadership. Again, to some degree, that is a very sector-specific. It's for the health sector, so probably not quite something the spatial plan can deal with. The next one is around communities and community. I mean, it really is about supporting communities that they can bring about changes that are needed at their local level. If you look at belonging, the outcome belonging, there's a specific focus there on local leadership and supporting that local leadership. So very
Sorry, just,
similar.
members, can we just have some quiet? We can all hear the conversation. Thank you. Jacques.
So really ties in nicely with what the goal is there. The next one is around schools and ECEs. And it really, there's a focus on low decile schools, and it is about, again, food. So not much that the spatial plan can do about that, but it is also about the urban environments. So again, if you go back to homes and places, and you go back to access and connectivity, that is what it is trying to do. And then the last one is around workplaces, safe workplaces, so probably not something that a spatial plan can deal with. So I think one way that one needs to think about this is in terms of, and I'm going to get onto mental health soon, a spatial plan is probably, health is a big issue, and it is a complicated issue, and there is a sector that has a strategic plan about how they are attempting to address the health issues that Aucklanders face. A spatial plan, I think we must be careful not to, for the spatial plan, to try and set what that is. A spatial plan can support that sector in certain elements, but it can't be all of the health sector. And so I think maybe we need to look at the Auckland plan in the sense that it actually supports the health sector in certain aspects in achieving their own goals. Just moving on to the mental health issue, and just to acknowledge this is something that Councillor Hill raised with us, I think it was in February already. So we had a good look at that. And we've worked with the Mental Health Foundation. So the Mental Health Foundation has 5, they call it ways to well-being, or 5 strategies. They are around connect, be active, give, take notice, and keep learning. Connect absolutely is about interacting with other people. That is what the outcome around belonging is about. Very similar thing. Being active, that is about physical activity. So if you look at different outcomes in the Auckland plan, again, homes and places, access and connectivity, and belonging to some extent, it is about physical activity and providing that environment within which it can help. So really absolutely directly linked to that. Give is about giving your time, so it's much more of a personal thing, but an example there is volunteering. So if you look at the environment and cultural heritage, you will see things around volunteering. So absolutely links with that. Take notice, that is a very personal thing, it's about being in the moment, so not really something a spatial plan can deal with. So. And then the keep learning, and there are all kinds of things that they suggest in terms of keep learning. We have a direction within the opportunities and prosperity outcome that is about ongoing learning, so absolutely ties in with that. So I think if one looks at these 5 simple strategies that they have in terms of mental health, the principle of what the Auckland plan has done in terms of the spatial and non-spatial absolutely lines up with that, without actually calling it that. And so I think the plan in that sense can support the whole idea around health and well-being, but it doesn't have to go into the detail, because these guys have done a really good job in terms of the detail. But the concepts are there, the outcomes are there.
Thank you, Jacques.
Shall I go on to the rural, or shall I wait?
I think we need to proceed, and I knew you needed to cover these areas, so I'd like you to proceed and cover the rural, and then we'll treat with the possible amendment.
So just lastly, quickly on the rural. There was a bit of feedback during the workshops, and you'll also see in the feedback from some of the local boards, again, the issue around rural is raised. I suppose the approach is that the basic fundamentals in terms of the outcomes are no different for communities in the rural areas. Something like belonging, access and connectivity, homes and places, that absolutely is valid for the rural communities. Where the difference comes in, the way that it plays out in the ground or the specific needs are often quite different from the urban areas. So what we will do is the basic principles remain the same, but where there is a specific rural difference or a specific rural need, we will bring that into the narrative and actually give those examples and explain that a bit. You will also see a lot of the rural stuff come through in the development strategy. Whether that's around the rural economy, the rural towns and villages, and just the general rural area, that will come through in the development strategy.
Thank you, Jacques. Any questions on anything that Jacques has, this part of the meeting, presented to us, members? I'll proceed then. I'll go to Councillor Casey, who is proposing an amendment. And can we bring that up, please? The amendment is to B. So the first part, Councillor Casey, is redundant. So the first 3 lines are actually redundant. I think what you're meaning is the amendment by addition is just Roman 1 and 2. Is that correct? Are you happy to just strike out for a secretary?
I took advice of the advisor.
Okay.
It replaces B.
It's
It replaces
It's okay. It's not an amendment by addition. It's an amendment by way
But
of
it's not
replacement.
replacing at all. It's accepting in principle.
Okay, you're
Addition
supporting the
of-
B and you're adding Roman 1 and 2. Am I correct?
I'm accepting in principle provided that we add in health and separate environment and cultural heritage.
Yep, also the same.
So it's not a replacement at all, so the democracy advisor was absolutely right.
No, it's replacing the B above, though.
I beg your pardon?
It's replacing the B above with that. That's all we're saying.
Yeah.
It's the same word.
Replacing B, I'm adding to B.
Yeah. We're all saying the same thing.
We're not.
Oh, yeah, promise.
No, you're asking to delete a bit of my amendment. I'm saying it doesn't need to be complete.
Okay, look, I need to be clear here because as I read it, we will then have 2 Bs. If this, we'll have the B that's being recommended by staff, and then we're going to repeat all those words and add Roman 1 and 2. Okay, it's going to be an amendment by replacement. If you want all of that to be moved, it's an amendment by replacement of the current B.
Yep. That's the simplest way to do it.
Okay, so I'll rule in that regard.
That's right now.
Sorry, Councillor?
That's correct now.
It is an amendment by way of
No,
replacement.
it is.
It is.
It wasn't before.
And it is moved by Councillor Casey, seconded by Councillor Walker. Councillor Casey?
I'd like to speak to it, thank you. Birthing the Auckland plan was one of the best things that Len Brown ever did. I felt I was present at the birth. It was a lovely baby and everybody was very happy. Right now it feels like I'm standing in the anteroom outside the birthing unit looking through very heavy glass at the clinicians dealing with the baby being born. I don't feel that I'm part of it, and I'm glad that we're now on to political debate because I don't want to have another political debate with the staff, no disrespect, Jacques. So this is the debate I want to have with my colleagues about why I think these 2 things are important. And it's about this document. I don't know, if you guys have read it, especially the new councillors, but I've toted this around with me to umpteen meetings over the years because I think it's excellent. It was one that Auckland was very proud of. And my worry is that this streamlining has taken out the essence of it for me, and that's what I'm going to argue to today. And I'll talk first about the health aspect. The biggest chapter in here is the one about people, and it's 66 pages long. And in it we want healthy people, and I recognise it's not council's job to provide health services, but it is council's job to advocate on behalf of the people for health services, so that the people of Auckland can be the healthiest they can be. And what I didn't hear from Jack, and I've listened now twice, is what we've got in here is a whole range of things that the Auckland people asked us to put in. And they cover really controversial things like immunisation, smoking, alcohol, obesity, gambling, preventing violence. And my worry is that this streamlined plan is only about measuring things that can be measured by us that we do. And it negates totally our massive, massive advocacy role. Because if the government ain't doing it, guess what? We're the next up to get movement on it. And that's what the people expect of us. And that's why this plan has been quoted so often. As far as I'm concerned, it's our Bible. And I don't think we're creating a Bible. I think we're creating a small catechism this thick. And I'm really concerned about that. And I know that I argued for just a revision of this with the numbers updated, which would have suited me far better. So what I think we're doing is taking out all the people-centred parts of this. And I think if we have health as a strategic theme, all of those are back in. So again, you can't measure them, but we can say when we go to a public meeting that one of our advocacy points is to reduce the harm from gambling, to stop the proliferation of alcohol outlets in poor areas. Now, that's not going to be in this new plan. There's nowhere in there for these words. So that's the first bit. The second bit, I am not convinced by the argument about combining environment and heritage. If I recall rightly, when we wrote the first Auckland plan, heritage was an afterthought because I think it was Sandra Coney and maybe Chris Fletcher demanded there be a separate chapter. And there's 16 pages of this plan devoted to heritage, which is a shocker in itself. But 66 of them, or 64, are related entirely to the environment. And if you stop 100 young people on the street and ask them what their main concerns are for the future, you'd get a very high percentage saying it's the environment. In combining the two, what you do is simply look at all the tootling that's been done with the words. It still doesn't do it for me. We need to be very clear. You can combine them in the words, and I appreciate the philosophical basis for combining them. But for the people of Auckland, it's more about which is a chapter on the environment. All right. What are the strategic outcomes for the environment? All right. What are we doing about that? What are our targets? All right. It's not about trying to find them in the morass of other things, which is what I had to do here. So this is a public plan. That's why this is great. This was great. I don't think that the proposal that we've got before us is so great. And I would like to shape it at this early stage into what I think it would make it to make it better. And I apologise, but this is what these meetings are actually for, political debate. So I've laid out my case, and it's different to what the officers have put up, and I would like some political support to shape it at this early stage. So it's not delving. I keep getting accused of delving down into the detail. I'm not. I'm saying this is a plan for Auckland. Healthy Aucklanders are really important to Aucklanders, as is the health of our environment. The way this plan is now shaping up, it's not doing either any justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Right on 5 minutes. Thank you.
Always.
Further speakers on this amendment by way of replacement, Councillor Sayers and then Deputy Mayor.
I had my hand
and
up.
I will take others. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just really take the opportunity to point out to my colleagues that it's not specifically mentioned up there, but it was mentioned as part of putting that up there, the rural sector that the officers just briefed us on, that the tone of the rural sector doesn't seem to be coming through very strongly in the document. And I'd like to just quickly read two paragraphs, one from the Rodney Local Board, one from Franklin, and their feedback. First one from Rodney says, it considers that the draft plan maintains a narrow focus on the city centre and dense urban living and will not resonate with communities that do not meet that description, including those of 46% of Auckland landmass that falls in the Rodney ward. But if we then include Franklin, which takes us up now to 72% of the landmass of Auckland, they say their feedback reads, the board strongly advocates, I repeat, strongly advocates for more defined differentiation between urban and rural Auckland, and with the retention of a separate section for rural in the revised Auckland plan. I've also heard this similar feedback at the Rural Advisory Panel. So it's just the comment, Mr Chair, is around the need for a balanced document in terms of the new Aucklander, the new resident to Auckland, reading this document. I don't think they get the impression that 72% of our landmass is actually rural, and it does have some specific needs. And I just would like that balance for the reader, particularly urban reader, reflected in the documentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. Jacques, Denise and Alec, you've made a note of the points made in debate there. Thank you. Councillor Cashmore, please.
Thanks, Mr Chair. I'm not sure about standing outside the birthing clinic because the baby that was born there is now 7 years old and tearing around the backyard, playing in the garden, getting dirty feet, can speak, has learnt a lot of things, can stand up for itself, feed itself, and probably even go to the loo on its own. So the 7-year-old Auckland is quite a special little kid now. It's actually had a huge amount of education.
Very good.
The health
Good analogy.
analogies are sewn in through that 7-year-old learnings. They're just there. The environmental, the air, the water, the built environment, the living environment, it's all part of it. Intuitively, it's part of it. The 7-year-old sees the houses, sees the green grass, sees the water, and plays and enjoys all of it as part of one. And the environment and culture are mixed. They're separate, but they're the same, because you can't have one without the other. And whether that's culture from iwi or culture from Europeans or culture from Pacifica or culture from anywhere, it doesn't matter. It's culture. It's a built culture. It's a living culture. This document is not the first document. It can't be, because we are 7 years old. We've grown beyond the space. There are some things that we all know intuitively. Think back to how Auckland was in 2008 and 9. Remember the birth at 10. Consider where it's going now. And where it's planned to grow in the future. You're going to be a teenager soon. So this plan is a different plan. It's not living in the past, it's looking to the 30-year future. It's important that we do also, Mr Chair, I believe. And we stay up high with the principles of all-encompassing. So I'm rural, I understand what Councillor Sayers has said, and I understand what the Rural Advisory Panel has also said. But rural are people as well. They share the environment, they share the built heritage, they share the air and the sea. We are all Aucklanders as we are all Kiwis, all New Zealanders. And I don't think you need to pull out different groups for different places for different reasons, because we are all one, all trying to achieve the same thing, what's best through a political, democratic process for this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Mike Lee.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'd like to speak in support of the amendment, particularly in regard to incorporating or aligning or integrating environment and cultural heritage. I'm of the opinion that this refresh of this 30-year-old plan, a plan that is meant to last 30 years, is premature. But I guess at least it keeps the council busy. The original plan, or the existing Auckland plan, which legally speaking is termed the Spatial Plan for Auckland, was designed by the government at the time of the beginning of the super city. I always felt to give the council something to do, given that most of the previous regional functions had been devolved to CCO boards. Whether that was a purpose or not, I don't know, but at the start of the super city, under the leadership of the effervescent Len Brown, a huge amount of energy went into the Auckland plan, not just from the whole of council, but by hundreds, if not thousands, of Aucklanders. So the document that was completed in 2012 had a great deal of consensus around it. I would hesitate to revise it at this early stage, but given that the council has decided to do just that, My real concern is that streamlining is not a euphemism for downsizing or gutting. And I'm concerned that juxtaposing cultural heritage with the environment is doing just that, weakening our focus on protecting the environment. By equating the environment with culture, and that's not really defined, we are actually guilty of taking a completely anthropocentric approach to the environment, which, given its importance to all of us and to the planet, is a rather foolhardy thing to do. In terms of New Zealand and culture, New Zealand was the last significant landmass settled by humans, and in terms of history, relatively recently. The country itself, the environment, evolved over tens of millions of years, not hundreds of years, millions of years. And our environment and our ecosystems are quite unique. The Auckland plan acknowledges that, and I believe that approach is a sensible one. Equating the environment and our role in regard to the environment with cultural heritage is highly questionable, given in terms of our built heritage, how impacted that is, how much of it we are losing almost on a monthly basis. Equating that to the more subtle and insidious effects on the environment really raises questions of our credibility, not only in terms of our commitment to protecting the environment and the whole literature reminding us, even in legislation, of the intrinsic value of ecosystems. That means that nature and ecosystems have a value outside the anthropocentric interests of human beings. But throwing that overboard and juxtaposing it in with human culture shows us two things on what we can see around us, that our record on built heritage, on human culture, is not that great, actually. All you have to do is pick up the Herald every week and see the latest Victorian villa that is being demolished, often without a resource consent. And in that, equating that with our attitude to the environment shows that our commitment to the environment, indeed our respect for the environment, is lacking. The Auckland plan, in contrast, shows respect and commitment to the environment and built heritage. And I think both of those are important, but of course, the environment comes before all. So I support Councillor Casey's amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got a number of speakers here. Councillor Wayne Walker will be the third speaker for the motion. Councillor Walker?
So,
three in a row. One against and one neutral.
Oh, they're meant to be in a row, aren't they?
No.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, consecutive. But I can rule accept 3, 4 and against, and Chair can rule to then put the motion. I will allow Councillor Walker, please.
So wait a minute. This is why we shouldn't have workshops, because none of us get the chance to put forward our views.
I don't have... Yes,
standing orders are standing orders. You don't just change
Point of order, Mr.
Councillor
Chairman.
Walker.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order is?
Can I just get it clear? Are you only allowing 3 speeches on this?
No, I didn't say that. I said I could.
No, standing orders are standing orders.
This is the Auckland plan. It's more important than anything we've discussed so
Okay,
far.
so that's... you're now taking a speaking turn. What is your question?
My question is, did I hear you right? Are you only taking 3 speeches for and 3 against?
No, I said I could. I could.
Are you?
No.
No, I'm not.
Thank
Councillor Walker.
He did.
You couldn't.
I can.
Councillor Walker, do you want to speak?
Yes, please. I was just waiting for the hubbub to die down.
Hubbub.
So
Hubbub. Is that news?
I'm speaking in support of
The gum.
Councillor Casey's amendment. And I've got a few points to make. The first one picks up on the comments that both Councillor Casey and Councillor Lee made around the Auckland plan. And I was certainly a councillor that was part of the process to put that together. It was widely consulted on. There was a huge amount of cost attached to it, and there was significant buy-in. It is far more substantial and substantive than what we are doing now in terms of this refresh. I think it is essential, and I'll repeat that, I think it's essential to have a link between what we're doing now to that earlier document. We should be doing something that builds on it, and we should be acknowledging its content. And that goes to the next point, which is around environment and cultural heritage. It's important to maintain that link to the earlier document. If we look at the context, at what is happening to our cultural heritage and our environment, it is dire. We are losing it at a phenomenal rate. Our cultural heritage and our environment.
Tell me about it.
And I refer to the state of our environment reports as it goes to our blue environment, the Hauraki Gulf, our other harbours, and our landscape. They are dire. If ever there was a time to highlight that plight of both the cultural environment and the natural environment, that is now. So in that respect, separating environment in all its form from cultural heritage gives a better opportunity to do that. The two are related, but they're also different. The cultural heritage, for example, also goes to language. It goes to other things in terms of te reo that are important. And frankly, I think confusing the two is not giving them the status that they need. The other point that I'll speak to is around health. And what is happening right now to the health of Aucklanders is a crisis. We know across rheumatic fever, across diabetes, across a whole range of metrics that we would examine our communities, we're in a really bad way, akin to third world countries. This is true. This is true. The dampness, the coldness, the living conditions that many hundreds of thousands of Aucklanders face is crucial. And if ever there was a time to actually give that some prominence, that time is now. It was reflected in the earlier Auckland plan, and I think it is significant enough to warrant attention. Just in terms of process, Mr. Chair, it might be that there is some possibility, if the mover were interested, in breaking those items up.
Yep.
Because I wouldn't want the separation of environment and cultural heritage to fall on the basis of health or vice versa, for that matter.
Happy to put them separately.
And then the last point that I'll make, and I'll make it very briefly, if I look at the outcomes and the strategic directions and the focus areas and the changes that we're making around environment, they're an absolute dilution, and they appear to be predicated around growth and development and making some modifications to growth as a compensation for some environmental improvements. I think that is also very confusing, and picking up on Councillor Lee's point, basically puts environment into some category associated with growth that I personally disagree with, and I would suggest many commentators would disagree with. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Denise Lee. No. Councillor Cooper.
I just wanted to clarify, so this is a legislative requirement that we need to review this after 6 years, or what's the...
Through the chair, the legislation doesn't require a set a review period, but in the current Auckland plan, we committed to a review after 6 years.
Right, so in the current plan, it said that we should review it after 6 years. So we're following the Auckland plan. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of, are we still questions or are we commenting? Sounds like lots of.
Past questions.
Okay, so just quickly for me, you know, I can't support this. We are ordering a huge, what we've already got, we've got the local alcohol plan coming up. That's finally going to be set. We're dealing with those issues. I think they're the kind of things that we do that result from a plan. And I think at the high level, those things will come out of this plan anyway. And that's what and I think even with the rural issues, though it's been highlighted, and we do need to make sure people know that we're one of the largest rural councils in New Zealand, but that it's that high level and how we actually implement those plans will give us the detail that'll address all those issues that are talked about here. And I think that when we did our workshops, we were pretty much set on the fact that we had it explained to us why it was really important to keep environment and cultural heritage together. And so for me, I think of, and I'm not going to speak for Māori, but I hear it, how culture and the land are linked. The natural resources are probably, I'm sure somebody else could say it better than me, but for me, that's actually intertwined. It can't be ripped apart. And so I think that's why, one of the reasons why it's important to keep it together. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Namani.
Kia ora. I'm speaking against the motion. I can't see how we can logically, at a high level, separate environment from culture. I'm not saying that only in respect to a Māori worldview. I'm saying that if we don't tackle human behaviour, then we're not going to address those matters that relate to the environment. And I'm really concerned, and it may not have been the intent, but I'm really concerned in particular the separating the environment from cultural heritage from culture is actually taking us back to the town and country planning days. And quite frankly, I don't want to be there. So, yes, it aligns to the Māori worldview. It actually aligns to Indigenous worldviews. If you don't put humans in the centre of the environment, then you can't address the behaviours that are good or bad, that are sustainable or not sustainable. So for Māori, we don't make a distinction between ourselves, who we are, our identity, and the natural environment in which we live. All parts of it is infused with mauri, a life essence, a life force. All parts of it are connected to our whakapapa that actually connect genealogically our relationship between nature and ourselves as human beings. And I'm concerned that this approach is short-sighted. We fully support having that acknowledgement of culture and heritage at the strategic level. And like Councillor Cooper, it's my view that all of the things we want to see achieved in terms of protection of the environment, of our moana, of our wahitapu, our cultural heritage, our built heritage, will come at the next level. And I think we're being too premature, and I think we're limiting our vision, because this part is like really high level. Let's wait for the next level, where I think the conversations about health, about environment, about cultural heritage and all the different strategies, actions and performance measures, because at the end of the day that's going to be where the rubber hits the road. How well is council doing in relation to all those? That's going to come then. So ironically, I think philosophically, when I hear some of the speakers in support of the resolution, I actually agree with some of the outcomes that they see, the same outcomes that I see. I don't see the separation of environment and heritage as actually beneficial, that actually doing that is anthropocentric. I can never say that word, you know, but bringing them together is quite the opposite. That's actually going towards sustainable management. And if you actually look at council in terms of what is the biggest contribution it can make to our environment and our heritage, it's through the RMA, it's through the Resource Management Act. And at its heart is sustainable management. And within that, it defines environment and culture as inseparable in some respects. So, yeah, I'm at a loss at the intent of that resolution and will not be supporting it.
Thank you, Member Namani. Councillor Clow.
I do have a question, and then I want to comment, but I do have a question because it will clarify something for me, because we're getting, I'm not really quite sure what the definition of cultural heritage is. I mean, Member Namani just sort of really talked about it as being something for Indigenous people.
No, I didn't.
I think it goes a little bit wider.
Right.
Okay.
Point of order, I did not.
Okay.
I acknowledged about human behaviour, and that is Māori or Pākehā.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Now,
heard it,
Or any
just to
other
clarify,
ethnicity.
I heard the member's speech and I heard her go well past just defining it as being limited to
Absolutely, I
Māori.
did.
Well, it wasn't a shot at Member Namani, far from it. It was just really the general discussion. I just wonder, what is a definition of cultural heritage? I mean, where does built heritage come into it? And where does us being cultured people, which is different than cultural? You know, where does it refer to us as being cultured people? Surely one of our aims as a sophisticated city is we're trying to become more cultured. So at Waitakere, we had a committee called the Arts Culture Committee. We actually turned it around and called the Culture, Arts and Heritage Committee, but because the emphasis on culture there was to actually just be cultured people. People who learn. People who are nicer. So where's that definition? Where's that come into it? So that's building and cultured people as compared to cultural heritage.
So if I pick up on that, excuse me, and it's a good question in terms of the definition there. And what we're trying to convey is a broader concept, that we're not just talking about the built environment and historic heritage, and reflecting your point that I guess using the term cultural is this evolution as well. I think that we've talked to around the table. So in essence, cultural heritage is defined as tangible and intangible assets. So I think we've heard, you know, yes, there's the buildings, the places, the landscapes and so on, but also the language and books and whatnot. And I guess in encompassing that broader definition is kind of, it points back to what we're trying to do with this outcome area. And again, I'm thinking regardless of the thing we're talking about, whether it's a building, whether it's a book, whether it's a language, it's what is the value of that? What is that delivering for Aucklanders, and what is again the intrinsic value as well, and making our decisions based on that. So that's why it's a broader term than maybe historic heritage, the connotations of historic heritage, but it is intended to be broader and capture that tangible and intangible.
Would you agree, sorry, this is a question as well, that therefore, but by putting environment there at the front there, I mean, can we sort of end up having too much emphasis on the environment, you know, per se, and not so much the environment around us? I mean, it seems to, I think most people would be thinking, you know, water, grass, trees, sky, and not really talking about a cultured environment around themselves, you know, that we are have a cultured environment in this city. We are trying to be Vienna, the Vienna of the South or something.
So far-ranging question there.
Yeah, well, that's what we're here for.
Briefly answer that one and then we'll come back to the debate. Thank you.
So, sorry, could you clarify the question in terms of the cultured environment?
Councillor Clow.
I'm just, when you got environment and cultural heritage together, most people are going to think about the environment being the environment outside, the physical environment outside, trees, air, water, you know, all those things. But cultural environment is quite different. Now, I don't know whether environment is actually tying into cultural environment. So hence, I think, I've got some empathy and sympathy for the amendment to try and divide it. Whether that's been clear enough, I'm not sure either, but I'm not sure it's capturing everything, because surely a big thing of our Auckland plan is we want to be a sophisticated cultured city, we're peace lovers, we're anti-war, we're all these things.
And so to respond to that, I guess remembering as well that this work stream, this outcome, isn't the only outcome. So there's also the belonging and participation work stream, the outcome there. And I think what you're talking about lends itself more to that discussion about how do we create cohesive communities that celebrate that culture. I think, apologies if I'm not, but I think that's where we'll see what you're talking about come through more strongly. Is it?
I think it's all a bit nebulous. I suppose that's probably the issue. And I think maybe that's what the amendment's trying to do, is just get it a bit clearer. As I say, I'm not quite sure the amendment's totally right, but I'm going to support this amendment anyway.
Thank you. Next speaker is Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In reflecting on this amendment, I'm trying to think 30 years ahead, and I'm trying to, and I've discussed this with the officers that are here, those strategic themes that they've brought to us. In my opinion, there is one missing. It's not expressed for me in health so much as wellness. Very often in life, we don't understand our health until we become unwell. And for me, what I would like to see 30 years from now is a society of Aucklanders that have not had to deal with the health issues that Councillor Casey is putting up today for our consideration. The addictions, the gaming, the alcoholism, the meth addictions, the abusive behaviours, the food dysfunctionalities, the nutritional issues, the fertility issues, where we, because of the cost of housing in Auckland, are seeing so many young people delaying having their children, that the grief that comes when they find that they can't. I could go on and on about the health issues that I would like to feel that we will not be confronted with in 30 years' time. So I wonder, when we're looking at these strategic themes, and for me, very much to do with wellness, is a clean environment. You know, you can't divorce your wellness unless you are living with good water, with good sanitation, all of those things that fall into areas, and I know one of our staff here today who has worked so hard on conservation. We need to have a fabulous environment to live in, but we also need that wellness to really be able to achieve all of those other goals that we're setting for ourselves within this Auckland plan. So I'm inclined to support Councillor Casey's amendment, but I wish, rather than the word health, that as a strategic theme she would consider the word wellness.
Fine. Wellness is fine with me. It means the same thing.
And the second is happy too.
Thank you for that. So I would ask that we try and explore a little bit further what we are trying to achieve with wellness, because that is where quality of life comes from. We can have all of these other things, but if we are not well, we can't enjoy them. So I would strongly urge you, and thank you, Councillor Casey and Councillor Walker, for changing health to wellness. I think that is a strategic theme that any thinking Aucklander would want to see us embrace, looking 30 years out.
I'm just checking this. Okay, the mover and the seconder have agreed to that change. Okay. I'll go to Councillor Hills, please, then Councillor Filipina, and then I will close the debate.
Thank you, Chair. We'll be opposing both, the amendments. The fact is, and I've been at every workshop, and I think they've been extremely valuable in the debate and the discussion, and the information has been fantastic. The main reason for not splitting environment and cultural heritage, which we've discussed a lot of times, I think it's actually a bold move to include it the way we have, and it recognises what our city is about as Tamaki Makaurau. And kaitiakitanga, if anyone should know what that means, if you don't know what it means, Google it. Like, it's guardianship, it's protection, it's all about the environment, it's about the way our cultural heritage, meaning Māori, meaning the indigenous people of the land, meaning, you know, the way we treat the water, that's one body of water, it's the way we see things, it's the way the feelings come through the earth, and your ancestors as well as the future are all there growing, and it's a circular thing. It makes so much sense to being together, and it's actually exciting that it's there together. It's the reason why we have the Maunga Authority, and the reason why it's not just about they're just volcanoes sitting around us that we can drive up. It's actually about what they mean for Māori and what they mean for our cultural heritage of this city, not just cultural heritage in the words, but actually what it means about the environment, about how everything works together and why we should protect it, not just, we're talking about it in a completely different way, and it doesn't even mention built heritage here. Built heritage is separate, and that comes throughout the document, but the whole point of environment and cultural heritage together is the reason we are unique as a city, and I think acknowledging it together is bold and different and important, and actually means, we're talking about what it means, but in te reo, in Māori language, there isn't actually words for every word. There's not a definition like in English where every word means something different. It's actually way more diverse than that. And also wellness. I met with Jacques and the team, in February to talk about how I really wanted to see mental health put in the Auckland plan somewhere. But, the discussion was we're being quite targeted, we're being direct, and it's woven through, and I'm keen for, it's in every bit. And what Councillor Fletcher was saying, in the belonging part and the opportunity and prosperity part, it talks about inequalities, it talks about the way we can reduce all these harms and ills happening to our community throughout. So it's all the way through the document. But I feel if we make things too defined and add too many streams and add too many things, then we actually lose the whole point of the Auckland plan. I believe that we can come out of the Auckland plan with all the hooks and all the things we want into different plans and things. So I think it's so important that we keep environment and cultural heritage together, and I think health and wellness is mentioned right throughout every outcome in a different way. And the way we can do it as a council, we can't open, we could open a hospital, but it's different ways we're addressing health, and that's around the environment and around public transport and around connecting and happiness. And culture's mentioned in there too, somewhere else throughout the document in a different way than cultural heritage, which is different to culture. That's the way I understand it anyway. So I understand the thrust of the amendment, but I support what we've discussed quite a number of times on the current direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. And I've got a question of clarification first, and it's around process. Now, if this amendment is lost, can it still come back after the consultative period?
You're referring to the ongoing engagement with local boards and key stakeholders?
Not only the key stakeholders, but as Jacques said earlier, February and March, we'll be going out to our public, to our community, and asking them of their thoughts and remarks. So that's the process question I have.
Jacques?
Yeah, absolutely. What we go out with in February and March is the whole plan, so including all the narrative. A lot of what I hear talking about is the narrative that you haven't seen. But of course, it comes back, that it will have to be considered, and then changes to the plan made. And this committee will make the decisions on those changes to be made.
Okay. Chair, I'm not going to canvass what other members have said here, but I will, however, quote, well, not quote, but to sort of mention what Member Ngāmani said, which is we got a strategic level here, and then there's details below. And I'm actually quite comfortable with that. I'm quite comfortable in the fact that our community will end up having the say, not only our stakeholders as per the substantive recommendations, but also our community in February and March. Chair, I also mentioned the annual plan process that we've just gone through. We had just over 8,000 people who had written submissions. We ended up getting 103 comments on social media, and 1,500 attended Have Your Say events in regards to this. And the reason I mention our annual plan is that the majority looked at 2.5. And we ended up going for 2.5. So the reason for my clarification question was exactly along those lines, that if our community comes back and says to us, no, it should be separated, we should be having environmental, we should be having that, I will be going with what our community will end up saying. That includes our stakeholders. And I mean, for me, the local boards are Auckland Council. You know, they're not stakeholders from my perspective, they're Auckland Council. And we know that. So, and Chair, look, I also look on the ongoing engagement that is in B. But I think one of the key things for me, and this is why I won't be supporting it, as the reasons I've said, but one of the key things for me, and I'm actually quite happy in what I've heard, is how the environment has been mentioned here. It's been lacking. We have the opportunity in the long-term plan, and I know that both Councillor Hulse and I have been very vocal in regards to this, that the environment needs to be lifted. It needs to be put around this chamber and the governing body, but it needs to be lifted. The long-term plan around any environmental issues or the lacking of in the previous years, that is when we will have the conversation. So I'm so glad hearing colleagues around the table mention the environment and how we need to be lifting that, because that's exactly what both Councillor Hulse and I have said, and it's about time we did that. So, Chair, I would not be supporting that. I will be waiting for our community to end up coming back after that consultative period. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, I'm not commending this amendment to you to be supported. I won't be supporting it. I'll be voting against it. I've heard this matter canvassed in the workshops a couple of times and canvassed well here again today. I do see and have experienced the interrelationship, the intertwining, the umbilical cord between environment and cultural heritage. And I've been privileged to sit on the Hauraki Gulf Forum as your appointee for a number of years, and also on the Maunga Authority. And in my time there, I've got it even more, that connection, that vital blood-flowing connection between environment and cultural heritage. None more so when I was on the Maunga Authority and finally understood that Maunga are not just about landscape. They're not just about the natural forms, though modified. It is about their connection through to Māori, and after some trouble just understanding the importance of that cultural connection to environment, I really did get it finally. One particular part that I never understood was the cultural importance of the peak of a maunga, the tihi, and I never quite comprehended the significance of the cultural connection to one part of that landscape, the importance of that spiritual connection to tihi. It had to be my task on your behalf of being at the Maunga Authority that really cemented in me the interrelationship, intertwining of natural environment and cultural heritage. That's just one example. At the Hauraki Gulf Forum, there are numerous examples at every meeting of that interrelationship and interdependency between environment and cultural heritage. Members, I am also struggling with the first part, the Roman 1, adding wellness to the strategic themes. And members, the strategic themes, they don't form part of the current work. They form part of the working model in Table 1 on page 27. And you might recall this from our workshop. We were taken through the strategic themes. They were the then working model. Well, we have actually gone beyond that now, and we now have a strategic framework which the motion does support, strategic framework which the motion supports, and we're into the discussing the outcomes, the strategic directions, and the focus areas. So to go back to inputting health or wellness as it is now into strategic themes is backing up the bus a long way. That is my view. Maybe the mover and the seconder meant to have it in the strategic framework outcomes, but that's not what it says. In my view, that does apply to the working model on Table 1, page 27. Members, we'll put it to the vote. All those in
By
favour?
division.
By division, thank
Separately,
you.
please,
I'll take
and
a
by
division.
Separately, please.
Separately and by division, thank you.
You would like Roman 1 taken by division
Separately.
and then Roman 2?
That's right.
Okay. Can we take the words for B with Roman 1? Councillor Casey, is that your intention?
That's right.
Okay.
Okay.
B1.
Councillor Darby,
Against?
Councillor Casey,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore,
Against.
Councillor Clow,
Again.
Councillor Collins,
For.
Councillor Cooper,
Against.
Councillor Filipina,
Against.
Councillor Fletcher,
For.
Mayor Phil Goff,
No.
Member Henare,
No.
Councillor Hills,
No.
Councillor Denise Lee,
Against.
Councillor Mike Lee,
Aye.
Member Namane,
No.
Councillor Newman,
For.
Councillor Quacks,
For.
Councillor Sayers,
For.
Councillor Simpson,
Against.
Councillor Stewart,
For.
Sir John Walker,
No.
Councillor Walker,
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Declare that lost by 12 votes to 10 or 10 to 12. Members, we'll take the next one. It's Roman numeral 2. And I just need to check with Councillor Casey, the narrative, the B, the first part still applies, correct? Thank you. So it's B applying with Roman 2. By division, please.
All right, sure.
We're actually the moderate. Yes and no.
I think
Councillor Darby,
Against.
insufficient.
Councillor Casey,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore,
No.
Councillor Clow,
Yes.
Councillor Collins,
For.
Councillor Cooper,
Against.
Councillor Filipina,
Against.
Councillor Fletcher,
For.
Mayor Phil Goff,
No.
Member Henare,
No.
Councillor Hills,
No.
Councillor Denise Lee,
Against.
Councillor Mike Lee,
Aye.
Member Namani,
No.
Councillor Newman,
Against.
Councillor Quacks,
For.
Councillor Sayers,
For.
Councillor Simpson,
Against.
Councillor Stewart,
For.
Councillor Simpson, she was against.
Simpson's against.
Sir John Walker, against. Councillor Wayne Walker,
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart was
So
for.
I was for.
So Stuart was for.
Councillor Stewart
Go
was
back.
for.
We'll just go back to the voting, please. We'll just check.
Stuart was for.
Councillor Stewart.
So Councillor Stewart was for?
Yes.
That's right.
Declare that lost 10 votes to 12. Is that correct now?
Yes.
Thank you. Members, we'll go back to the substantive motions. And they were actually moved by myself earlier and by the Deputy Chair. And I'll take them together. All those in favour say
Division,
aye.
sorry, division. Because I know it was going to be called, so I'll call it.
Councillor Filipina has called a division.
On the substantive motion?
And taking the two together, Councillor Filipina.
Okay. Councillor Darby,
4.
Councillor Casey,
No.
Councillor Cashmore,
Yes.
Councillor Clow,
Yes.
Councillor Collins,
For.
Councillor Cooper,
For.
Councillor Filipina,
For.
Councillor Fletcher,
Against.
Mayor Phil Goff,
For.
Member Henare,
Yes.
Councillor Hills,
Yes.
Councillor Denise Lee,
What?
Councillor Maikley,
No.
Member Namani,
Yes.
Councillor Newman,
For.
Councillor Quacks,
For.
Councillor Sayers,
Against.
Councillor Simpson, Councillor Stewart, Sir John Walker, Councillor Wayne Walker,
No.
Councillor Watson.
Against.
Thank you, members. I declare that carried 16 to 6. And on that note, thank you, staff. We will adjourn our meeting now until 1 o'clock. It's been a long innings. Thank you for the good contributions on the last item, board members.